guys, this is Rick coming at you with Weed to No Basis, the podcast for all things cannabis business related. Are you an entrepreneur? Have something you wanted to create, something you wanted to bring to life in the cannabis industry? Maybe you've always wanted to partake in one of the biggest industries in modern day history. This is the podcast to listen to that.
We're live and we're recording from two different parts of the country. I am at HempQ headquarters here in Central Texas. And in a second, I'm going to introduce somebody really cool. But first of all, before we drive on, for those of you who are watching this, and those of you who are maybe listening to this and can't see it, maybe you're on iTunes and some of you are on YouTube, the reason why you're here is because you're on a weed to know basis. And one of the cool things before we jump into today's episode is this is the first time we are actually going to have a branded background. And that's one of the changes you're going to see from now on. We're going to be posting our sponsors, the people who we work closely with, companies we represent, things like that. And so the screen behind me is the first time ever that we've used our Weed to No Basis logo live on our show. But let's jump in. Guys, I'm stoked today for a few reasons because I've known Linda for a while and we finally were able to connect a time to get her on the show. So today, it's my pleasure. We're introducing Linda BIGGS, the Cannabis QueenRX. Linda, tell us where you're coming from right now. Where are you at today?
I'm in northern Baltimore, which is the north side of Maryland, not far from the Pennsylvania line.
So northern Baltimore.
Northern Baltimore.
Nice. So I'm randomly curious. So I used to live in the district in Washington, D.C. And so how far are you away from from D.C. itself?
It's about 50 miles. And it's funny that you said that because in my previous life, D.C. was my territory. So I drove to D.C. every day, and it was a piece of cake, but traffic is a lot more now than what it was back then.
Gotcha. Previous life. What does that mean?
I used to be in advertising, and Washington was my territory. So my clients were there. I went every day. But now that Cannabis Queen is my life, it's a whole new world.
Nice. I'm going to ask you in a minute about the Cannabis Queen and how that became your life. But so I didn't know that. So you were in advertising. Washington was your territory. Was there a specific, what do you mean when you say advertising? Did you sell it? Did you create it? What did you do?
I did a whole gamut of things. For a while, I worked at an ad agency for about 10 years. And then I moved into corporate printing. So we printed annual reports. And then at that point, I was servicing clients like the National Gallery of Art and stuff like that in doing their product pieces. So I was taking samples and print and that sort of thing daily.
Gotcha. So were you the one creating it, or were you the one selling it, or both?
Well, I did both. For about 10 years, I was creating it. And that was a long time ago before we had computers and it was paste up. And then as the computers became the way to design, I didn't want to learn that. I started selling it.
Gotcha.
I'm too old.
So Linda, so this is interesting because I didn't know this. So are you naturally a creative? Are you somebody who let's just say an artist?
Yes.
Good.
And I was always a painter. And then that's how the snowball just got bigger and it just happened. It wasn't planned.
Nice. It seems like it never is. It's often one of those moments where we have a skill set or we know how to do something really well or we love, or we've just made money doing it, whether it's selling or whatever. And let's say a new industry or something hits our radar or the horizon, and we're able to parlay our skills, our interests, our passions into what has become Cannabis QueenRX, right?
That is exactly how it happened.
Exactly. I got to show this. I was going to save this for a little bit later, but I just got to, a lot of times folks will jump on these shows and they'll jump off, but what I'm showing you guys here, and get on the YouTube channel and check this out. This is your creation. This is, tell me about this, this literal tray in my hand right here.
That happened. In the beginning, I do a watercolor and the painting, and then it gets scanned. And then, and it's funny, I'm like a one-man show. Then we create the product, source the product, inventory the product, and then I get the product out on the street. So it's a lot from start to finish. And it takes about a good 9, it's like making a baby. It takes about 9 months from start to the product that's in your hand.
Gotcha. So I just took a really big jump for the listeners and for the folks who are viewing. We talked about Northern Baltimore, your territory, selling, advertising, and then I just went bam, and here's Cannabis QueenRX. And you actually gave this to me in person at a show. What part of the country was that in? Where did I see?
Vegas Champs.
Vegas. That's right. That's right. So now let's bridge that gap from advertising DC to creating these incredible trays. And I want you to tell the folks what exactly this is, and then kind of walk us through the story. Like, how did you get from there to here, and why? Okay.
Well, tell me where to start.
Okay, so let's start with when did the spark, when was the first spark of, man, this cannabis industry or what's going on here is really intriguing. I'm curious. What happened?
Well, it is exactly that. Unfortunately, the things that we think will be the demise of us end up being what makes us explode. And what happened was, in 2015, in 2012, I was in a really bad car crash. In 2015 is when I tried cannabis for the first time. Cannabis brought my life back. And when it did that, I said to myself, there's something here. I need to explore this. I need to celebrate what brought my life back. Back in the beginning, I had lost the ability to hold a pencil. I had lost the ability to paint. And once cannabis became a daily routine for me, it was like each day I would get a little bit better. And then the next day I got twice as good, and it just kept exploding and exploding. And that's when I said to myself, I have to do something to celebrate this. And I did an event. We made rolling papers. I did an event. And that's when I said, oh my gosh, I'm onto something. I'm proving that this medicine is truly medicine. And it brought me back to this wonderful state. And people are now seeing that I basically, I couldn't walk and I couldn't talk. And now I'm at events selling my wares. That was when I said, we're going to make this happen. And I just jumped in 200%. I didn't look back. I didn't plan it. I didn't do it. It was like, okay, I went to National Cannabis Festival. And from that moment on, each event got bigger and better. And that's when I said, I'm going to make what you just held up, the tray, the rolling tray, or we can also call it a jewelry tray, depending on where we are. I'm going to make these trays because that's something that I use, and it's pretty and it's durable, and I felt good selling it. And once we did that, it took a whole new life of its own.
Gotcha. So the trigger moment, or the moment, or what began the journey was, I loved what you said, was that, and I'm going to go back to listen to what you literally said, but something like, our demise is what makes us explode. So are you saying that the demise was an accident?
Yes, I was in a really bad car crash, and traumatic brain injury, permanent spine trauma. Like, my left side is still, it's numb. It's always numb, and I really don't have control, but I've learned muscle memory and all that stuff since then, but I never would have done it if I had not tried cannabis. And at the time, it was not legal in Maryland. It wasn't medically legal in Maryland. And a friend bought me a bag of gray market weed. And truthfully, I was insulted. I was like, here I am, this 50-some-year-old woman. I've never used it, and you're going to tell me that's going to work? Well, it did. And it was, I was totally dumbfounded. It was like, how can something so, at that point in my mind, it seems so insignificant, so minor. How could something like that make a difference? And I started using it each day, and each day got better. And then I started researching, and I'm like, oh, this is not minor. This is major. And from that moment, all pharmaceuticals went to the side. and I had some other issues prior, it has, I mean, and this doesn't happen to everybody, but it has basically fixed everything that in my mind, in my little body was broken. And I'll tell you now, Rick, I'm better than I was before the accident. I'm better than I was when I met you last year. Just continuing to try and learn and try new modalities and ways to use it. It's been crazy, but that's what's also made the artwork so intense, because like a lot of the artwork she'll be crying or it's this, that, or the other, but it's all the emotion wrapped up into one, and put it into the piece of art, and then take that piece of art and put it into an ancillary product. It's been a win-win.
I love those micro sound bites. The demise is what makes us explode. That's power right there. Because I think Linda, I don't think I know that a lot of people will resonate with the message of you weren't a pothead, and this is me saying, these are my words, not yours. Yeah. And I think we're a lot alike, is that I didn't, and I say this with love and respect to all listeners out there, is that I didn't grow up a pot smoker or a weed, a pothead or things like that. It's just, there was a demise in my life that actually catapulted me into this world, into the world of cannabis, whether it's marijuana, weed, CBD, whatever. Let's just call it all under one umbrella. Let me ask you, so being that it sounds like before we came out of the closet, if you will, it sounds like we may have been a lot alike. What were the challenges when you came out of the closet, like around friends and family, and what were their challenges? What happened?
I think the biggest challenge for me was my grown children. They started calling me stoner mom, and I laughed and I said, well, do me a favor, don't call me stoner mom, because I'm not stoned. And at that point, I was like trying to make them understand my physical body was so messed up that I was using copious amounts of THC, and it was just combating the problems. I've never gotten high, and I use RSO daily. And after we understood that, hey, don't call me stoner mom, now it's a joke. Now they can call me that, but that was my biggest thing. I didn't care what anybody else thought. I didn't care what the neighbors thought. I was like, this medicine is so powerful, I've got to tell everybody. And I felt like I was standing on a mountain just saying, you've got to listen to me. And for me, the pivotal moment was the doctor who, he's a spine surgeon in Maryland. He called me to congratulate me for thinking out of the box. He said, we couldn't fix you, but you took a step where you kind of fixed yourself. He said, you could have been one of those people in my waiting room who's just sitting there waiting and nothing's ever going to happen. He said, you picked up, you thought outside the box, and now look at you. This is incredible. He said, back then we couldn't suggest this. He said, we didn't know, but even if we had known, we couldn't have suggested it. He said, but the way that you have healed yourself and now you're like making everybody listen to you, it's crazy. And if I didn't have art as my platform, I might not be so vocal, but it's kind of like, that's what I can hide behind. So I can like put the art in somebody's face and say, look at that. We'd let me do this, where prior I couldn't hold a pencil. So yeah, my children, that was the only thing that was hard. Everything else, let them talk, because I wanted them to talk.
I love, there's power behind all that, everything you just said. I know that in our very first episode on this show, We Do No Basis, it's called My Cannabis Origin Story, and it's how I came out of the closet. And I'm gonna be honest, like I was back then. It's been a few years now, but it was difficult. It was a challenge, and I reflect back, and I wish I had a little more of that. I could give two shits about what people think, but I did. And my realization was that there are a lot more people outside of that closet receptive than there were people in the closet trying to hold you back. And no regrets, but I just love how you just said, screw this, and took it to the next level. Tell me, You know, if you folks, if you're listening to this, obviously don't try and do this if you're driving or you're occupied. Don't switch over to YouTube. But you guys have got to go over to the YouTube channel or WeedTube. This streams on WeedTube as well, and check this out. So there's, you know, I wouldn't call myself an artist. I love to write, and I've always loved it when people can create things like this out of their heads. Is there a meaning to this besides just the colors and the there's a lot of art there, a lot of detail. What does this mean, Linda?
They all tell a story. Every piece of art that I have done in my grown life tells a story. Now that one is actually, that was prior to my cannabis life. I was actually at an event and a little girl was in my booth, and her mom kept telling her this was when I sold my art at shows prior to the cannabis world. This little girl kept looking, and her mom kept saying, just pick something, pick something. And the little girl looked at me and she said, none of them look like me. And I looked at her and I explained to her that myself, along with many artists, we create what we're comfortable with and what we know. And she said to me, I want you to create one that looks like me. So the fairy ladybug, and she picked that the ladybug was her favorite thing, was basically an image of this young lady who didn't look like me, who had dreadlocks. And I did that, and then later they bought the original. So yeah, each piece, someone either has to make such an impact where that's where the art comes from, or the piece of art is an actual story of my life. I don't just paint random. They tell a story. And that was the story of this little girl's life who I had never met before. And then they started following me show to show to show. And it turned into a really cool thing.
I love it. I love it, Linda. And I know that, and I also on the back, folks, it's hard to see with the reflection, but you actually signed it. What you just shared is more, it's impactful in so many ways. And I can't let this message of what you just shared go lost on some of the listeners or viewers. And that's the word story. And that's, even though yours literally tells a story with the picture, with this art, part of what makes businesses unique in cannabis, CBD, marijuana, whatever aspect of the cannabis industry you're in, is the story. Whether it's your story, which Linda, you shared yours, whether it's the story you actually paint or depict, whether it's your about page or all those things, but story is so powerful because the saying is facts tell, stories sell, and we're for-profit businesses, let's just be clear about it. And, we could all point to, the dye, the color schemes, maybe you picked this color from some ancient snail, but what really matters is what you just told us about this photo, about the little girl, about the dreadlocks. And if you guys can't see, the details are this painting, actually, this tray, she actually has dreadlocks. And I'll never forget the story now. Up until literally right now, Linda, I kid you not, this was a rolling tray. It was very special to me, as I kept it right next to my desk. But now I know the meaning behind it, and suddenly the perceived value of this tray is potentially exponential. And I don't want that to get lost on the entrepreneurs who are listening to this, because facts tell, stories sell. And that's a wonderful thing. I love that it's for either jewelry or for,
Wink, wink.
Yeah, wink, wink. Let me ask you something. I don't want to skip over this part. You mentioned RSO, Rick Simpson Oil. So explain to maybe some of the newer, let's say, people who are just emerging from the closet, what is RSO and how is it different from, let's say, traditional medicinal marijuana or recreational? Like, tell us what RSO is.
RSO is Rick Simpson Oil. I don't know the chemical breakdown part, so that part you may have to help me on. But what I will tell you is how I use it is probably not the typical way most people use it. In the beginning of my journey, I was looking for ways to get large doses of THC because I had such a pain issue and I knew that that would help. so I started making my own suppositories, and that is how I use the RSO. I use the brand Nature's Heritage, if that matters. That was one that just seemed to work with me really well. And I've used it every night for about 2.5, 3 years. And the way I use it, I don't get any cognitive, I guess, impairment or high or whatever, but I know that if you use it orally, or if you were to smoke it, I suppose, or however other ways you could use it, and you tack it or whatever, you would get extremely high. But I was just really trying to combat a high pain situation, and doing it this way, I'm able to use it every day, where I guess and then I microdose with it. So I'll go up a little bit for 3 days and then come down a little bit for 3 days. And I keep doing that just so that I don't make my tolerance of such a potent medicine ridiculously high. I wouldn't be able to afford it money, or I wouldn't want to use that much medicine either. But as far as the chemical parts, I don't know, but I know it has like 85% THC in it. So it's kind of high.
So it's a little more potent form. And again, we're not getting the chemical stuff. Believe me, I'm not that nerdy about marijuana or cannabis either. But it's essentially a more potent form of cannabis, and it's specifically called RSO, and it's named after. And I'm not a historian, but Rick Simpson Oil. I just wanted to share that because cannabis, it's an emerging thing, and people are going to start hearing these things more and more. So back to, first of all, before we get back to the business part, thank you for sharing that. I've been enlightened. I didn't know a lot of these things. I knew bits and pieces, but now the story is kind of making more sense. It's like I knew about Linda Biggs as if you were a movie and bits and pieces, but now it's starting to kind of take shape for me. And wonderful story. So you started to do the advertising. DC was your territory. You then had an accident, and cannabis began to change your life. You're able to hold a pencil again. And I'm glossing over the details. And then tell us then how Cannabis QueenRX, like the business, then came about, because you started creating these things. You went to some shows, people were purchasing them. You met the young lady behind this inspiration. Tell us then how the business began to form.
Well, after I had attended a few large shows, I was doing, the first show was National Cannabis Festival, which was in Washington, DC. And I'll tell you, when we did that, it was kind of like, you're standing there, you're like, is this legal? Is this, what's going to really happen? Well, we went to the event. It was huge. It was wonderful. And I took these little rolling papers that we made, and I sold every single one of them. And that's when I said to my daughter, I said, we're on to something. And at that point, I still had, because I have other websites, which I'd had for a long time, we had the rolling papers on there. And I said, you know what? I want to separate the rolling papers from the regular artwork, because not everybody that buys the regular artwork wants to be inundated with the rolling papers. And that's where my focus is. So that's when we set up the, and I don't know dates. I'm really terrible with numbers. I can't remember numbers, and that's the traumatic brain injury. We set up the website, Cannabis QueenRX, and then that's when that website became totally dedicated to all the cannabis art that I'm doing and all the cannabis products. So I separated the cannabis products from the older website, and the Cannabis QueenRX. So it has the cannabis art, the cannabis products, and then a little bit of the story, and then a blog, that sort of thing. But I just thought it was really important to keep the business of cannabis 100% and not let it get clouded with artwork that wasn't of that. So that's how that happened. Gotcha.
Tell me about, I shared with you before we started recording that I have multiple screens open. I have timers and my iPad for notes, and I'm probably getting some sort of electronic EMF forces all over my office, but you know what? It is what it is. I'm curious now because I'm looking at the site and I've looked at it before and I'm looking at it more intently now. Now that we're speaking one-on-one, what's the story or the meaning behind the style? And I guess what I mean is that it's kind of whimsical, almost like a fairy fantasy kind of style about it. What's the meaning or story behind that? Because literally, I'm looking at your site and everything. You've not only told the story, but this almost seems like you've built a brand around this whimsical fairy fantasy kind of world.
Well, back in my other life, when I was doing art and selling advertising and all that, I was a fairy artist, and there's a whole fairy underground. And in my mind, since I was 6 years old, I'm a fairy. I am not a human. I am not of this world. I don't understand TV. I mean, just let me have my art, let me have some tea, some scones, and I'm good to go. And we used to, there actually used to be a really intense fairy festival not far from where I am here in Maryland, which became the world's largest fairy festival. So that's where my persona as a fairy came from. I mean, I'm sitting here in regular clothes, but normally when I go out, I'm in fairy wear. I don't wear this jeans stuff. It just doesn't work for me. So it's always been, I mean, I'm 58 years old, and since I was 6 years old, I've always been, in my mind, I'm a fairy. So that was the feminine creatures that just kept coming up, and I've tried to paint other items, and it just doesn't work. It's got to be the fairy.
Gotcha. You stuck to what you know and what you believe.
Yeah.
So it's so when you were 6, you identified like with this, just like a lot of us like identify as a race car driver or as whatever it is. We envision as a doctor, as a nurse, as something that's a fairy, and then they say we grow up. And I think the distinction is you grew up, but you didn't. That part of you, I think there's something blessedly cool about that you didn't forget those childhood things that keep us kind of thinking as children. I think that's a wonderful thing.
We all are artists. We all come out able to color outside the lines until the grown-ups say, oh, no, color inside the lines. And when I would hear color inside the lines, I would color the sky purple and green, and I would make it so outlandish that they heard that I'm not listening to your direction. I think that's when I was 6 and realized that I was just going to follow my own little drummer. And with that, I really believe that all of us are artists, and that part gets silenced, and it shouldn't. I mean, we would be so much happier if we were able to remain rainbow in our brain and color outside the lines in everything that we do. It gives us more passion.
I love that. Sky was purple and coloring outside the lines. There's you're just dropping all kinds of sound bites on us as well. You mentioned gray market weed earlier, and I wrote that down. I don't know why. I mean, you've heard of obviously rec legal weed and medical marijuana and black market. What is gray market weed? That's just curious.
That's right at the time when Maryland was starting to create its medical program. And it is funny because when that happened, I was one of the first to say, I get the card. But at that point I didn't have a card, and a friend came with this little Ziploc bag. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with that? I'm like, I had never even seen it before. I mean, I was that closeted. And I'm telling you, Rick, I was like, I'm not using that. Get the hell out of here. Well, once they left, of course, I'm online. What can I do with this? And I'm like reading, and I made my own butter, and and then that's when I was like, oh, I'm onto something. But I didn't want to be buying it illegally, and I did. I bought, and I'm calling it gray market. I mean, maybe it was black market, but gray was a little softer. I bought a couple ounces at $400 an ounce, buying that. That was the only way I could get it so that I could make the butter. But as soon as the Maryland program became a possibility, and the medicine is way better than me making it. So, once I was able to do that the right way, it took a lot of problems off of the table.
Nice. Love it. I was just curious. Gray market weed. I have not heard that term before. So we're recording this at the end of 2019, and some people might listen to this in early 2020, maybe even later on. So instead of asking a question like, what's the big plans for the next, for 2020? What I want to ask you is, what's on the horizon for the next 12 months for you as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, whether they're goals or metrics, what can we expect to see from Cannabis QueenRX over the next 12 months?
The next 12 months, gosh, that seems so big. In the first part of the year, we have 4 new trays, rolling trays coming in. Because they're sourced out of the country, I never know exactly when. They're already in production. So they'll be coming in, and then at that point, Champs Trade Show. And from there, I just want to do as many events as I possibly can. I will be sponsoring the Cannabis Science Conference, which is in Maryland and also Oregon, I believe. I'll be doing that. And the National Cannabis Festival. Those are the things that I know that are already on the calendar. But I want to take this feminine, and no disrespect to things that are not feminine, but I really believe our market needs more feminine pieces. These pieces are real art that can be used in every direction. So I want to take them to bigger places. I don't have those bigger places on the calendar yet, but I think people need to see them.
Gotcha. So you're going to, I'm looking at my other notes as well. So you have some events on the horizon over the next 12 months.
Yes, Champs is the one that will be in Las Vegas, and that's at the end of February. The next one after that will be National Cannabis Festival and Cannabis Science Conference. Those are definitely on the table. And then after that, I'll just start adding to it as they come up.
Gotcha. So do you get a big punch out of the events? Like, do you realize they seem to work is where I'm going with it?
They absolutely do work. I've learned that you may not leave the event with extra money in your pocket, but what you have, that's how I met you. I had been following you and following you and following you electronically, but seeing you, hugging you at the event, that's where it all becomes real. So the events are so, they're out of this world. That's where the connection is made. And Champs really did it for me last year.
I'm a big believer in that, Linda, about that word connection, and I think not in the way people think. In other words, one can connect electronically via Instagram or texting, but there's something different when you see somebody live. And like you said, you're like, oh my God, we actually meet in person, get to hug them, and there's warmth, and there's a real person, there's real connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the magic. That right there is what the whole thing. I mean, that's when it's just like a cosmic explosion when you can connect that way. It's the whole thing, full circle.
Interesting. I've read a lot of blogs and articles, and oftentimes there seems to be a much bigger flurry right before events of the top 3 things to do at this event, or the top 5 ways to make it impactful. And I got to be honest, I don't know that I can put my finger on one of those blogs or posts or advice columns that says, go hug somebody to connect. That's a new one. And that's an awesome one too.
Absolutely. I think because of mine being art, for some reason, people want to hug. And I think it's just a connection of, we're all real and we can all do this sort of thing. And I don't know, that whole hugging thing, it just.
Yeah, it's different.
Perfect.
Yeah. And you were not dressed in jeans or a black sweater. You were dressed like a fairy, if I remember correctly. You were true to form. Nice. So you've got more products, you got more stuff coming in, you've got more events on the horizon. It just sounds like, I'm going to use the word 2020, or the next 12 months is just going to be big and more of Cannabis QueenRX.
I hope so. I mean, actually, I just listed on Leafly last
Okay.
week. And with that, I've been getting emails and questions. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, even something that in my mind was kind of minor. So, what I would like to do is on our website, I have a services page where I will paint some kind of icon for someone and they can use that on their brand. So that might be the thing in 2020 that I work on a little harder instead of just my own personal products. I've done this for 3 people or 3 companies and it really worked. And now that I've listed that on Leafly, who knows? Just bigger.
Interesting. So what you're saying is maybe like one-off or even what do they call it when artists are paid to do a certain, what do they call it? What is the
Licensing.
word? Not, it's not licensing. It's commission.
Yeah. Oh,
Commission. Like,
yeah. Yes.
yes.
Can I show one?
Yeah, if you have one, I'd love to see some. Yeah, by all means. I think there's a, I believe there's a big place for that. So put a little closer to the camera.
This was done for a Maryland dispensary called Nature's Care and Wellness. And I took their ideas and made the painting, and then we created the tray. And they use the tray in their dispensary, I guess, as other places use pens or whatever has their logo on it, but this has their logo on it. And once I did that, I was like, you know what? This is a really good way for me to utilize my skills and give somebody something a little different that they can have as their own. It's an original, it's theirs, and we collaborate that way. So I'm hoping to do a little more of that, although they're very time consuming.
That's very cool. I will say, you may be onto something. We just held our annual conference, Green Seed Texas, about when was it? A few months ago, and there was the local group of artists who actually wanted to create a backdrop for us, and it was one of the most unique things ever. They actually it was made. It was made of wood, and it was probably about 6 feet high, and it was handmade, and it was it was a large marijuana leaf. But it was Instagrammable. It was cool. It had our logo on it. And it was out of the box because you couldn't just find that anywhere. It was something that came out of somebody's mind. And they said, can we do this? And we commissioned them. That's what I was looking for, commissioned to do it. And they made it for our event. It was super cool.
That's cool. Who do you still have the piece?
No, it was so big. It was going to be a one-off, and they knew it. They knew it was going to be for the one event. And then I couldn't even bring it home. It was too big. Like, I can't show you the size of the office I'm in, but we couldn't. It was
Right.
that unique. But there are a few other pieces that were done for us that we did, and one of them is actually here. It's over there on the other wall, and it's probably about 4 by 4. And my point is that they were unique one-off things they did specifically for us and for our event. And one of them still lives today. I mean, I'm pointing off the camera like you can see, but it's right over. Yeah. Come on over here. Let's walk. No, it's right over there. No, that's super cool. Like, I can totally see. I'm looking at your services page now. Like, they're being commissioned artwork. There was as people want to differentiate, I would think an entrepreneur who wants something, and they should want something that's very unique to them, you may have one of the few services that can do something like that. This is cool. I'm looking at your page right now. I know this is not very conducive to a listener or a viewer, but you got to go to her page, and she'll give you the website when we're done, CannabisQueenRX.com. But I'm actually looking at your drawings, like your handmade drawings. This is like, holy shit, this is pretty cool.
See, because I'm a fairy, I'm allergic to technology. So I can only do things by hand. And like on a painting, if I drop the paintbrush and there's a big splatter, I don't Photoshop that out. Whatever is on the painting stays on the painting.
That's it. Very cool, Linda. So Linda, I mean, now that I've kind of intrigued people, they want to say, what are you looking at, Rick? Where can we find you on the web or where can we find you?
The website is www.cannabisqueenrx.com, or I'm on Instagram, Linda Biggs, and when you'll see it, it says Linda Biggs and King Kitty, but all you have to do is type in Linda Biggs. That's LindaBiggs. Facebook, I'm on all the social platforms, but Instagram is the most fun. Twitter
Gotcha.
as well, under Linda.
Nice. Instagram, website, and then you're going to be at some conferences like Champs. And for those of you who've never gone to Champs, Champs it's massive, huge. That's where we connected and in person last year. Very cool, Linda. I got to tell you that I've known you now since last year and maybe even sooner electronically. And now hearing your story and talking to you again face to face, even though we've actually talked face to face, it's becoming a lot clearer. I get a better sense of who you are and why Cannabis QueenRX stands out. And especially now, the story behind the jewelry tray. The jewelry tray that I have here.
Yes.
So it's super cool. And again, folks, we can't let this get lost, that on Weed to Know basis, we talk to a lot of folks, we do commentaries, editorials. And the reason why we bring on entrepreneurs in the industry is because it's important that you understand the story behind why they do what they do and what they do. And a lot of times their journey, and this is my phrase, but out of that cannabis closet, because not all of us have been in this industry for a long time. We've emerged because of some, what did you say? What's demise? Yeah. I was trying to think of a demisable event, but that doesn't sound right. No, it's cool. Love the story. So CannabisQueenRX.com. We can find you on Facebook. Folks, and all of these will be put in the show notes, whether you're on YouTube or WeedTube or you're on iTunes. So don't write this down, especially if you're driving right now. All these notes will be put in the show notes. But love it. Linda, it's so awesome to connect again. And we may see each other again in Vegas in February of 2020.
Rick, I am so happy. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was awesome. And I'm telling you, when I saw you walk by in Champs, I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, there he is in person. So yeah, this is cool.
Nice. Looking forward to a big, explosive, awesome 12 months, the next 12 months. And remember folks, the next 12 months begins every day. Especially the calendar for an entrepreneur does not begin on January 1st. It begins the day you wake up. It's 12 months. The next day you wake up, it's 12 months. We're always on the grind, on the hustle, creating, doing things for the greater good. So Linda, I really appreciate you being on today.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Nice. So folks, remember, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, if you have questions, comments, leave them down there in the notes. Go to Linda's pages, to her Instagram, go over to our pages at Weed to Know Basis and the personal page at Planet Boy. Most of all, the reason why you're listening or watching is because you two are on a Weed to Know basis. Have an awesome rest of the day and week. Peace.